Hi, I'm Sasha Moore, and I'm delighted to be with Morgan Owen of Penny Finance this morning. Welcome, Morgan.
Hey, great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. So Morgan has kindly offered to be in the hot seat. Well, actually, she hasn't offered. I've requested, and she's graciously accepted to be in the hot seat to have an interview about the power of authenticity in the lead up to our webinar on next Friday. So the reason that we're having this webinar and the reason I'm interviewing people is to really unpack this quite elusive term of authenticity, which seems to sort of be getting more and more traction at the moment, which is fantastic. But in terms of obviously embracing it, you've got to really know what that means for you, and equally knowing what works for you would, I expect, often preclude what doesn't. So Morgan, I know that you're very much embraced in your personal and professional life, your authenticity, and I would really love just to hear your insights in terms of how you've really tapped into your authentic self and how by doing so you've enabled an environment that you're now flourishing.
Oh, thank you. Oh, look, this is a huge question. I think I'll just start by saying that. And the next thing I'll say is that it has evolved for me over time quite significantly. And I don't think I would have ever at any point in time in my life at that particular point in time said that I didn't think that I was being authentic. At each point in time in my life, sort of, going through school, going through university, getting into relationships and all those sorts of things, like you think you're doing the right thing, right? And for you at that moment in time, it is. And I'm a big believer that, I don't have regrets. I have lessons. I don't, and failure is all part of that. And for me, it's just been about evolving to a point where I'm actually genuinely happy. Now, that's a big one, because I think when I wasn't being authentic, okay, let's just use that as the word, I wasn't happy, and I couldn't figure out really why, because externally to the rest of the world, I looked like I had it all together. And I've always looked like I had it all together. I was the typical teacher's pet, I'm the typical people pleaser, the typical box ticker, got married, bought the house, all the things. And you think you're going to be happy. You think doing all those things makes you happy, and it doesn't. Well, at least it didn't for me, right? And so then I just got to a point where I was so incredibly unhappy, and I was like, what am I doing? And I really had to look internally at myself and work out where I was going wrong. And a lot of that had to do with society's pressure and society's expectations of me and being what I thought I was supposed to be, as opposed to being what I really was. And that's a scary thing, when you've gone from being someone who is so, call it people pleasing and keeping everyone around you happy, to then go against that grain is really, really hard to do. And it took a lot of courage. And I remember at the time when I did it, and so what I'm referring to essentially was leaving my marriage, and then my next relationship ended up being a same-sex relationship. And I was, not necessarily promoting it, but when I did start to sort of come out about it all online, the amount of people that I was getting that was messaging me saying just how brave that was. And at that time, I didn't necessarily think I was being that brave. I just thought I was just being me. But then upon reflection, I can see why people would think that. So I don't know. Does that answer the question?
I think it answers the question, and you're right. It is a massive question. And what I find just so interesting, every single person I interview has such a different take on it, which is why I actually really also love the subject. And I was reflecting on your response, and I think hindsight is a great thing. But I think also, particularly when you're younger, something feels out that you can't pinpoint it. And as you were speaking, I was like, you know what, like I relate so much to what you're saying. And it wasn't until I was in environments that really supported me in my core and my essence,
Correct.
that I had a different framework of what that would be. And I
And isn't
think
that
that
whole thing about like you can't be what you can't see, you know, and like
100%.
we're so conditioned to being
Yeah.
a particular way, you know, family values and things like that. And you know, I have a great set of family values. My family is incredible, you know, and it's not that it's not, but it's also that they're very quote normal, you
Yes.
know.
Yes.
And so then there's all that pressure to be just like that. And I
Yeah.
followed all of that. But then it was just so not me, you know, and it held me back in life. It really wasn't until I sort of let all of that go, let all of that pressure go, and just thought, you know what, I really have to go in on me right now because otherwise this isn't going to end well. And then I was able to actually flourish. I was actually able to have the business that I have now and operate at the level that I do and have the people in my world that I have. Whereas previously I didn't have all of that because I was just literally just going through the motions.
Yeah. No, and I think in terms of going through the motions, again, when you are younger, there's no other reference point than that's normal, right? And
Yeah.
so if you feel like the black sheep, then I assume there was something wrong with me because
Yeah.
I'm looking at everyone
Yeah.
else drinking the
Yeah.
Kool-Aid and who are as happy as clams. And I'm like, I actually thought there was something wrong with me.
Same.
But
Same.
what I realized was where the environment I grew up in it was never ever, it didn't ever resonate with me, but there's a reason for that. And so particularly when I moved to New York, I was like, these are my people. Like all of a sudden I found my tribe. All of a sudden it's like go big or go home, and all of a sudden risk is embraced, innovation is embraced, and so on and so forth. And it was the first time, and it was very early on in my career, but it was the first time I had this different lens of what it could look like. And so to come back to your comment of you've got to be it to see it, that is actually the reason that I'm doing this webinar and podcast initiative, because in terms of owning myself, and I've always been disruptive. And I thought, you know what, if I'm going to walk that talk, I need to actually hopefully help be a voice to then change the discussions or have different types of discussions that then hopefully promote a greater sense of awareness and then empowerment. So that is, you hit the core of exactly what my ultimate objective is to do with this series. So in terms of just coming back to, I 100% agree that when you're in these different phases in life, personally or professionally, it might the authenticity piece. I think you touched on a good point. It doesn't mean you're not being authentic. It's just that perhaps you haven't tapped in yet to what is your authentic self.
Exactly.
And I don't know about you, but now I'm sort of comfortable in my own skin and I'm confident that, you know, that's okay for me, but it might not be okay for some other people, respectfully. I'm good with that. And so now to act in this consistent slipstream is much easier because you're in
flow. Yeah.
You're in the flow of it.
Yeah.
So what I would love to get your insights about is having really tapped into who you are, who your essence is, and really choosing that despite being against the grain or because it's against the grain. How does that work for you professionally, and how have you created an environment where your authenticity, your values, and other really have the airtime to flourish?
Well, I think the way that I do it, and I use it now in my marketing, and that's probably the most you know, the widest way that I use it, right? So, you know, I manage a team. So like with my team, I'm very open, very transparent, very authentic with them. You know, like I'll say to them, like, some days I'm a goddamn superhero and I can do anything and I'll change the world. Other days, I may as well be a goddamn potato because today's not the day and I'm not the one, right? So like, it's really important to understand, especially when people have really high expectations of you, which they do of me. And, you know, things obviously are going really well, and outwardly again to the world, things look like they're fantastic. And look, they are. But it doesn't mean I don't have bad days. It doesn't mean I don't doubt myself. It doesn't mean that I don't lack confidence at times. So I think being ultimately transparent is part of my authenticity. And, you know, that's bitten me in the butt on occasions, because I'm also very overly trusting with people. And so like, there's certain instances where I'll let people in where I potentially shouldn't. I probably need a lot more skepticism in the way that I operate, but I wear my heart on my sleeve, and you get what you get with me. So I'm working through that. You know, authentically, I am just an open book, but I need to be making sure that I protect myself as well. And then with marketing, you know, I use it online, you know, so the way that I've built the Penny brand is around just getting on stories and talking to people about what I've got going on and who I'm helping, and sharing through like actual storytelling, you know, whether or not that's in relation to my life or the work that we're doing here. So, and I think that really has helped us stand out in the industry, is probably what I would say. You know, everyone's so, you know, and it's evolving, and I don't know, maybe hopefully we have something to do with that inspiration out there. But, you know, when I first started mortgage broking, the thought of having an Instagram was like, are you kidding me? That is the stupidest idea. And that's what people were telling me. And had I listened to that, I wouldn't have the business that I have today. So one of my biggest things I think that I've learned to get comfortable with is being uncomfortable. So all of the times where I've had this little thing in my gut that's like, oh, this is big, like this is a bit risky, or this is going against the grain, or this is doing something that someone else is not doing, I'm now at a point where I can't go all in on that. Right. Whereas younger Morgan would have done the opposite to that. And like, an example of that was like, you know, you were talking about how you moved to New York and you found your people, right? Like, that's awesome. I think subconsciously I grew up in a small country town, so that was never a fit for me, just genuinely wasn't. And I knew that I wanted to come to the big smoke. I wanted to come to Melbourne. Like, that was going to be my thing when I went to university. And so I came to Melbourne, but it was really hard, right? I'd moved away from home. I'd moved away from everybody that I knew, and I was uncomfortable, very, very uncomfortable. And I remember being in the car driving and calling mum and being like, I have no friends. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do. It's really lonely. And so mum's advice, which isn't bad advice, but it's typical advice, which was because I grew up playing basketball. And so she's like, go join the local basketball club, right? Because, you know, that's comfortable. You'll find your people there and everything like that. So the irony of all of that is that then became my life, right? So I went back to there. Yes, it was comfortable. Yes, I played basketball. Yes, all of that went well. I ended up meeting my husband, my ex-husband now, ended up meeting my ex-husband. All of those people that I had rebuilt that same comfortable life that I just had, but now I was just in Melbourne instead of in the country town, right? And so then I got to a point where I realized, oh shit, I've just repeated history here, and this isn't what I wanted at all. So just the lesson in that was that instead of being uncomfortable, being lonely, and just figuring out and going in a different direction, I went back, and I essentially wasted, you know, not wasted. Obviously, I learned a lot in that time, but, you know, I could have had a completely different 20s, like, because that was my whole entire 20s was back doing that. So yeah, look, lean into the uncomfortable is my big thing, but also authentically, I don't necessarily know that everyone has that same level of resilience that I think I do, to be able to lean into that, fail, get up, try again, stuff it up, go again, you know, because that's the other thing that I have a bit of an uncanny ability to do.
No, and I think that you raise a really, really interesting point. I think you're right. I think it is human nature to just go in the path of least resistance, but the growth is fairly marginal. And actually, the first webinar I did in this series was called Being Driven to Fail, and it was all about embracing risk. And my guess, having the brief time that I know you, I'm definitely a risk junkie, and I sort of get the feeling that you might be too. And it is leaning in that it's almost like a restlessness. Like, you know, you can, it's all like my team was like, you can smell blood. Like I can just smell that, like, you know, this is gonna work. Like, it doesn't matter what I'm hearing. I just know instinctively that this is worth pursuing.
I say my whole thing is say yes, worry about the details later.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. No, I love it. Well, look, Morgan, I could speak to you about this all day, but I'm very conscious of your time. Thank you so much for agreeing to be in the hot seat. I greatly appreciate your insights, and I'll look forward to seeing you on the 18th.
Thank you. Appreciate it.